And welcome to Kicking and Zooming, brought to you by Allstate. I'm your host, Anthony Totera, and right now we've got a new segment. It's called Touchlines. Players from the past, we're touching back with them. And my first guest, the inaugural show and first guest, is former Canadian men's national team player and Toronto Blizzard player, Paul Peschisolido. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on, Paul. I wanted to have you on as our first guest because you tick off all the boxes, playing youth soccer in Ontario, playing at the senior level as a Canadian, playing overseas, everything that young Canadians would dream about today doing, and some of them have. So I wanted to talk to you first and foremost, Paul, about your days playing in Ontario football. Talk about some of those memories. Talk about some of those days that seem long, but it was all worth it as a youngster looking back now.
Yeah, it was the most fun I ever had. You know, as a young kid growing up, I was quite fortunate that I got involved in the Scarborough program, which at the time there were some real top players in the Scarborough area. I played for the likes of Guildwood under Pat Haddad. We had a very strong team winning Ontario Cup and Ontario Cup one after another. We dominated pretty much all of Ontario for about 4 or 5 years. I moved to Wexford. Again, we dominated, moved on to Scarborough Blues, which was my final club team prior to getting involved with the under-16 national team and being involved with Toronto Blizzards soon after that. So, like I said, it was a real hotbed of football. Whenever we played in the Robbie tournaments, you'd come up against international teams from all over the world, and we would beat them. So at that level, we were very, very good. The issue was a lot of players wouldn't stay with football because they pursued ice hockey, which was the number one sport, or they would go and pursue other things because they didn't see a future in Canadian soccer. But fortunate for me, I was involved with the Canadian team that played in the Under-16 World Cup in Toronto. As a result of that, I stayed in the program. I was a carded athlete, which means they gave me some spending money and looked after me while I trained with a large core of players in Ontario. And every once in a while, we'd meet up with the other boys from all the other provinces. And like I said, I stayed with the national team program, and then was drafted to Blizzard. So yeah, it was. I lived the dream. It was brilliant.
Absolutely fantastic. Talk about some of the youth coaches, Paul, that you really still admire to this day, guys that help mold you as a player, but also as a human being away from the pitch. And you think about some of them today, and I'm sure that you're grateful for them helping you through that journey, that path in your life.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, there's still a group of players from my Guildwood and Wexford days. Pat Haddad, who was the coach, they still worship him to the day, you know, still call him coach, and he's a lovely man. And he put together a great group of players. And like you said, didn't just teach us football, but he taught us how to be good people and really how to be competitive, how to be a good winner, how to be a good loser. So he was a very, he was a good influence. But my biggest coach was my mother and my father, who, without a shadow of doubt, without them, you know, nothing would have been achieved. And my dad was a disciplinarian. He knew I wanted to be a footballer, so he pushed me, and he really pushed me to the point that some people would think it was abusive, but it wasn't. He saw a talent. That's what he said to me. He said, "I saw a talent." The minute you would have said to me, "Dad, I don't want to be a footballer anymore," that would have ended. But he says, "As long as you tell me you want to be a professional, then I'm going to push you and push you and push you." And he was tough. But I thank him to this day. Then going back to my youth coaches, again, Pat Haddad and Tony LaFerrara, who, again, holds up a huge amount of respect from anyone he's ever coached, whether it be at Seneca College, at Scarborough Blues, or at Pickering, wherever club he managed. First of all, had success, and secondly, had the utmost respect for him. He's a great man, and what's a knowledge about football. You know, people don't realize that to this day, he is sitting to him, and his passion about football is ridiculous. His knowledge, he's constantly trying to learn the game. So I was very fortunate that I had someone like these men who knew about football and molded me to learn the game and understand the game, not just play it.
And as a father today, Paul, you look back at the sacrifices your parents made, your father, who you talk about in glowing terms, and what he did in changing his life upside down, I'm sure, his work schedule, his financial situation, all to make sure, not just for you only, Paul, but for your teammates on the teams that he coached. Talk about the sacrifices that now don't go unnoticed, but maybe back when you're a teenager, they were taken as granted.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I couldn't afford because he's a hardworking man. You know, he was a plumber. He, you know, didn't have tons of money, but especially when I got involved with the national team program, not to mention all the time playing with Gilwood and Wexford, never missed a game, traveled all throughout Ontario, wherever it was. He was there on the sidelines, screaming and hollering at me. But no, he, you know, and then when I got involved with the national team program, that was from the age of kind of 14, 15. The training camps, I lived in Pickering. The training 2 nights a week were in Oakville from Pickering. So my poor dad, he'd be up at 5 in the morning, he'd go to work, do a full shift. He'd walk in the door, he'd throw his lunchbox in, say, come on, let's go. And he would drive, you know how long it takes in rush hour to get to Oakville on a Tuesday and a Thursday. He would do that on a Tuesday and Thursday. And then on his occasional day off on the weekends, because he worked weekends as well, bless him, Saturdays and Sundays was Hamilton, which was even further. And we would do, and this was 4 days a week. And I did that for I don't know how many years. The expense of petrol, the expense of, you know, whatever it was. And at that time, we would freeze, cold, sun, rain, snow, we trained. And he would sit there on the sideline, whether it's minus 20 or, you know, and he was always there with his bonds, you know, very, very supportive. But I never complained. I never heard him moan, never complained once. Apart from the bad drivers he'd have a go at. Apart from that,
I like him already.
Moan. Yeah. Apart from that, he would not moan at all. And to this day, I'm so thankful for my mom and dad and what they did for me, because it was huge.
And that's commitment, and that's all they care about, to see the smile on your face, as you like to see from your kids today. And talking about kids and young players today, Paul, you've watched, I'm sure, many in Ontario coming back and making family visits, but obviously you've watched many in England and the UK and Europe. What are some of the positives that you see in some of the youngsters today, but what are also some of the negatives you believe that you're seeing in them that you as a player would wish they would have in them?
Yes, positives is technique. You know, kids are out there playing on the pitches, tricks galore, working on first touch. In terms of actual technique, keep ups and the tricks that they can do are unbelievable things I couldn't do. You know, keepy uppies we could do, but my only trick was putting the ball in the back of the net, which wasn't a bad thing. But these kids can do some unbelievable things. They're probably far more athletic than we were, because the science about football has changed, so they look after themselves more. So it's all there, you know, all that's there. But the biggest issue you need to succeed is to have an inner strength and a drive and a determination. I see a little bit of that lacking, and the reason being the way we were brought up is different to the kids nowadays. We had a bit of tough love, you know. My dad, you know, like I said to you, he was hard on me, so I didn't think I was the greatest thing in there. I could score 20 goals in a game, and he would talk about the 3 chances I missed on the way home. Kids nowadays, I'm just as bad as everyone else. We think our kids are wonderful, and we sugarcoat everything, and we don't like them to fail, so we fix it. We fix this, we fix that. We do this for our kids. And it makes them a bit softer and not have that kind of real hunger and drive and kind of nastiness about them to succeed. Because I tell you what, to be a professional, especially in England or Europe, it's dog eat dog. Every kid growing up in England right now, I tell you, by the time they're 5, wants to be a professional footballer. So what's going to separate you from them? You know, and it's tough. It's tough. And the ones who survive are the ones who have that inner strength and that real determination that make it.
I think back when you were playing, Paul, and I don't think you would have ever challenged the coach, whether he was your father or any other coach. You wouldn't challenge them. And I think today, again, maybe this is something that I find a little bit odd, is where a lot of young players come in with a swagger and an attitude that they've already accomplished everything, and they challenge their coaches. I don't mind the swagger. I don't mind the confidence that you had, and you still recall the days with the Blizzard and putting us out with North York. You had that swagger, but you didn't have it in an arrogance where I see some of the youngsters have it today.
I agree with you 100%. And then that's an issue. There's being confident and there's arrogance. I'm not a big fan of the arrogance, I've got to say, because I was brought up very differently. My dad, God, he kept me grounded. And I don't like to see, listen, if you're great, people will tell you're great. You don't have to go around showing you're great, or, you know, having city haircuts, or, you know, pink boots to show people that you're great. And I emphasize this on my son. I used to tell him all the time when he was playing. He no longer plays football, but you know, if you're a good player, you don't need gimmicks. People will see it. They'll tell you. Believe me, I've been there. So I don't like all of that. I like people who get down and do the hard work, and you know, the first one on the training pitch, the last one off. These are all things that go well. And to challenge a coach, for me, that's just it's just wrong. You know, these people are putting their time and their knowledge into the game, and you do what they say. You know, that's their job. You know, they're the senior person. They're your coach. You respect them, whether you like it or not. You get on with it. They tell you to jump. You say how high, and that's the end of it.
Well said. Let's talk about the journey. You make your way over to England as a young man, a young Canadian. And as a Canadian going over to the Lions Den, as I like to call it, they must have been looking at you and probably mocking some of them behind the scenes, and probably saying to themselves, what's this guy doing from the Arctic North? Where's his hockey stick? And how did you overcome that? How did you overcome that? Because I got to be honest, still today, we'll talk about the Davies and the Jonathan Davids, the young Canadian stars on the rise for Canada. But still today, I find that Canadians are not given that respect. How did you gain that respect?
I gained that respect by keeping my mouth shut, laughing at every joke that made fun of me, because obviously we dressed differently, haircuts were different. They tore it shreds to me, but I never reacted. I would just laugh, and they thought that was great, because English people are quite self-deprecative. So as long as you can take that and not have a go back, which I didn't. You know, they were senior guys. I was still very young when I came to England. I just laughed. I just laughed. I just got on with it. But then they saw me play, which helped. I was very fortunate that, you know, Tony Taylor had obviously given them an insight, because Tony, who's, again, a wonderful man, and without him, I wouldn't be sitting here where I am today. He took a chance on me, and he gave them insight. I got off the plane. I played in my first reserve game, trial reserve game, scored within 5 minutes. So that helps. That settles things. But you still have to get, you know, earn respect off the pitch and still be a good person and what have you. And you got to have that drive, and not, you know, I was there to take one of their pals' positions, this Canadian kid, and it didn't go down well, but I didn't care. You know, I wanted to be a footballer, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. So that's where that strength and that drive and that determination comes in, and wouldn't let anything stand in my way. So, you know, I was very prepared for it. I'd had an opportunity in Italy where I wasn't prepared, and I regretted it, and I wasn't going to let this chance go to waste.
As a youth player, and then you made your journey over to the UK, Paul, looking back, and even as you said, you watched your son play the game, do you still feel that there's a lack of an identity with different clubs and academies, whether it's in Canada or in the UK? I know that even in Italy, there's only a few clubs that really specifically tailor their identity to a style of play they want. Do you feel that we need to do this more in Canada, or we need to let it be?
No, I think, especially at the professional level, I think an identity is important. I think it's very difficult to get an identity here in England, because you are driven by success. And unfortunately, as you know, managers' shelf life now, I think, is 11 months. So you don't have long in a job. So by the time you get in that job, you need success. You're not able to build an academy, and you're not really looking at your young players coming through, because you've got 6 games before you're getting sacked. So you worry about the now, which I don't think is the right way. I think if I had a football club, I would want it from bottom to the top to have an identity, so you know how you're going to develop your players and what players you want that will fit into the style of football you want, because that's so important, you know. And if someone does get the sack, or if a manager moves on, you have to find someone who works within that identity. Otherwise, it's financially very expensive, because I've seen it myself. You get a new manager in who has new ideas. He sacks all the coaching staff. There goes 70 coaching staff. Sacks all the medical staff, doesn't agree with it. And then none of the players are good enough because they don't want to play the way he's playing. So that's where it becomes very expensive. So for me, it's, yes, have an identity, and stick with it. And you know, this way you can make small changes and keep the way the team goes. A la Man United. Man United have that type of football, and they tried to keep it, but it's gone wayward since Ferguson's gone. So it's not an easy thing to do, but I think imperative.
Let us give an insight to the young players all across Canada watching this, and even to some of the ones that are now in their journey as a professional player. Obviously, your journey with Fulham, Birmingham City, and of course, I can't forget Sheffield United, because I have a friend that keeps reminding me about that unbelievable moment in time that you brought them to another stratosphere, let's say, Paul, with that celebration. But talk about the differences between those clubs that I mentioned, and how it meant to their community, how it meant to their youngsters, that their youngsters were looking up to a player on Birmingham, on Fulham, on Sheffield United, that they had someone to look up to.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's life, and football's life and death. It's a religion. It's everything in this country. And to this day, I've been retired for almost 20 years, I think it's been. And to this day, on the anniversaries of all these moments you're talking about, the Sheffield United goal in the semi-finals to get us to Wembley to get to the Premier League, to 18, 20 years later, I'm still getting hundreds of texts and Twitter people saying, you know, that was the best time of my life, and they were 6, 7 years old. So it means everything to these people. And to this day, you know, they're showing me how much their shirt cost, because they had Peschisolido, which was quite expensive letterage for back then. And yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful that you've played such a big part in these people's lives. And, you know, a place like Sheffield, which is a steel town, very workmanlike. To this day, if I go there, people lord me. It's wonderful. It's really, really wonderful that you've touched people, and you've made an impact on their life. And it feels amazing for myself to have been able to do that. And I was fortunate that likewise at Birmingham, at Derby, at Fulham, West Brom, I was very stoked. These clubs, I was always a crowd favorite, probably because of my work rate, and never, you know, my dad used to say, you might have a bad game, just run around, show people you care, run around. And that's what I did. So people liked me. And like I said, to this day, people still stop me and say, and it's wonderful. It's a great feeling, great for the ego.
You can never replace that feeling ever, Paul. Well said. I mean, before the journey, obviously you made an impact here in Canada. And let's talk about that. The Canadian Soccer League, Toronto Blizzard, the memories as a youngster playing there, going to a final. Some of the players that you played with went on to so much success in their own personal careers overseas and in North America. And it's safe to say, Paul, that those players that came out of the Canadian Soccer League back then, Canada's only league, coast to coast, provided the closest opportunity that we had to get to a World Cup. Talk about the memories and the players and the competition of the CSL back in the day. And now we're going to get to, obviously, the Canadian Premier League, and your thoughts on how that's going to all work out for our players.
Yeah. It was essential for us. It was essential for the players to develop, to have a league where you're playing against the best the country has to offer week in, week out. You're obviously getting the best coaching the country has to offer at each the different teams. This helps your development. Without that development, I was a young boy. I was going to school. I was in high school playing professional football. And to the point, I remember playing, I was at Dennis O'Connor High School, and I turned up and I was playing professional football too. And I don't know if it was allowed or not, but I did it. And I turned up at Dumbarton to play the team. And you know, the coach was Jens Lehmann. Jens Lehmann was a school teacher. And he's like, Pesh, what are you doing here? You can't play. I'm playing against you on the weekend for North York Rockets. You can't play in this game. This is crazy. I was like, sorry, Jens, but I'm playing. He was like, oh my God, what's going on here?
So, that's incredible. I saw Jens, Paul,
it's
about
crazy.
A month or two ago before the pandemic, and we were actually talking about the Blizzard and the Derby with North York, and that story is priceless.
Yeah, it was superb. So, but without that CSL, we wouldn't have had as successful of a team, and that national team was a good side. And you know, back then there was only 2 teams that would go through the World Cup, and we are always third, just behind what we were. More competitive than we've ever been back then, and we had some really talented players and players who who played in the CSL and played abroad as well. So yeah, it was crucial. It was a great league, and I think if you want to have a national team, you need to have a competitive league where players strive to get to and gets the best coaching and can play.
So what are your thoughts? Obviously, we're sitting here in the Canadian Premier League offices, and we're thinking about the opportunities that the first year provided many players, many Canadian players, and many Canadian coaches, where the door would have been shut on many of them across the globe because, again, they're Canadian and because, again, they have to prove themselves time and time again. How important is the Canadian Premier League for the success of young Canadians to start here, and eventually, if they want to get to where you were at in some of the best clubs in the world and playing in England, how important is it? Just like for you going to the CSL and to the UK for the same here in the CPL.
Anthony, it's not important. It's essential. It's essential. That's all there is to it. This gives these guys a platform. You know, it's unfortunate the MLS is not conducive to Canadian players because it's a good league, but we need a league where these players are playing weekend who can be spotted, because they're not going to get spotted. Even in my day, players would go under the radar if they didn't get to the CSL. We don't want players going on the radar. We don't want players who just fizzle out of the game because they haven't had an opportunity. The more teams we can have that play at a professional standard, the more opportunities there are for Canadians who are unknown, who might play in some little small district, who are spotted. They get into the Canadian Soccer League. They're playing week in, week out, and all of a sudden, you know, they're on a platform that people say, "Wow, this kid's great," and they get their chance with the national team, or they get spotted. Because I tell you right now, teams across Europe are looking for the next talent. They're looking for where's the next hotbed, where's the next Anthony Davis.
Alphonso Davis.
Where's the next Alphonso Davis going to come from? We want, you know. It's a kind of a country that still hasn't really been explored as much, and you get them on the cheap, which is perfect. So yeah, it's essential. It's really essential.
How cool is it now, sitting where you're sitting in the UK and in Europe, to look and watch again what Alphonso Davies did this weekend and that goal that he set up, and just the magic that he's providing week in and week out to talk to friends and maybe family members and say, yeah, he's from my country, Canada. And finally Absolutely. Get that respect now that people are starting to say, you have players like that here?
That's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. It gives me great pride when people say, oh, how about that Alphonso Davis boy from Canada? Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. That's what I want to be bragging about. I want to brag about these young kids who are given the chance. And we have a good mentality in Canada. You know, they're good people, and I want to see us competing at the highest level. I want to see Canada in a World Cup. I want to see us competing. I want Canadian players playing in the top leagues in the world and doing it, because we have some good, young, talented players. And I don't want to see them just fizzle out of the game because of lack of opportunity. And hopefully with the Canadian Soccer League, we'll see more and more Alphonso Davises across Europe and, across the world.
Let's talk about when you wore that red jersey for the first time, and the many games that you played for the Canadian men's national team, and the blood, sweat, and tears you left out there for the country. You never said no, and you always answered the call. Talk about some of the memories and some of the enjoyment you had playing for Canada. I know especially Edmonton's got to be a nice place in your heart because you had a lot of success there in Commonwealth Stadium. Paul, talk about it.
I did, yeah. I scored a few goals there. It's probably some of the best football I played with Canada was there and around that time. But it was a wonderful experience playing for your country. There's no better accolade as a professional than representing a country that you're proud of. And it was amazing times. And not only that, the players that I spent time with, to this day, we're still in contact. Craig Forrest, who was my roommate for 10, 15 years, one of the nicest blokes. We've literally been pals, and it was a real family atmosphere. Every time we got back, you'd share the stories from your clubs, and it was just like being back with your family again. It were wonderful times. We had a real great group of players, and it was a joy, first of all, being with them and having experiences with them, and then being able to represent your country and win games for your country is just, there's no better feeling. It was amazing. And it was tough. You know, it was tough because at the time, Canada didn't have finances. So we were flying economy across the world. After playing a match on a Saturday, you would jump on an economy flight and fly to Panama, 13 hours, and expected to play the following week. And, you know, they made it as difficult for us as possible. Whatever country played again, they'd have a party, and they'd have a party in the reception of the hotel. They'd turn the electrics off so you wouldn't have no air conditioning. They'd put you on the top floor and make sure the elevators wouldn't work. So you'd have to run up and down. So it was one thing after another you were fighting against, which made it extra difficult. And then the games, especially away from home, it was like being in a cauldron. Like El Salvador, to this day, it was some of the scariest times I've ever experienced. Were there, where you know they're throwing bags of urine at you, splashing them off the fence. It was disgusting. But you know, getting on the coach afterwards, you'd get 10 long of supporters chasing the coach, wanting to kill you. It was scary. But,
I don't think Paul
galvanized us.
Yeah, I don't think, Paul, today people realize you went through that. CONCACAF is a region that now finally is starting to get some of the respect worldwide that it needed even back then. Jurgen Klinsmann said it when he was coaching USA, that he believes some of the European countries would have trouble going into Honduras, Mexico, Costa Rica. You mentioned the urine thrown at you, nickels and dimes and all sorts of stuff happening there. And it was a challenge. And it was something that obviously you believe some of the Canadian players today have to also get ready to experience, because that's what they're going to go through.
Oh, absolutely. The mind games were endless. You know, they wanted it as many advantages as they possibly could. And they would use it to their advantage. It was nasty. It was horrible. It wasn't nice. I've seen the refereeing, some of the refereeing back then was just, it was hideous. Absolutely. I'll never forget against Panama. I was sent off. The goalkeeper, I think it was the goalkeeper, pushed me into a defender. I bumped into him. He turned around and punched me. I've gone down. I got a red card. Those two didn't get anything for being punched in the face. And I remember Alex Bunbury saying, he's just been punched. It just crazy. So you were dealing with crazy things. The pitches were substandard. You know, the day before when you would go to check the pitch out, there would be sheep on there grazing. That's how they cut the grass in some of these countries. So it was tough. Let me tell you, it wasn't easy to finish even third, let alone second. It was very, very difficult.
How important is it today, Paul? Obviously, back in the day when you played, you didn't have a number of people that support you like I did, and many Canadians, diehards like I, that were out there. How important is it today, especially with the 2026 World Cup coming to Canada, that our young Canadians get to embrace our players, the Davies, the Jonathan Davids, on and on, that they go with the Canadian flags at Varsity Stadium and not the opposition flags? Because I think back then, it would have been much, much more easier for you guys to see a stadium full of Canadian flags.
That would have been wonderful. You know, wherever we played was an away game. Whoever we played against, whether it be at Varsity, you know, you would play against Italy, all the Italian flags would be there. If you played against Cuba, all the Cuban flags. It was tough. It was tough. It was not easy. But now, you know, I see even in the MLS, people are really taking to their local clubs. And even with the national, people are far more patriotic about football. They understand it more. There's much bigger following than we ever had. So, yeah, I urge people, get out there, support your country, get your Canadian flags out there, be proud to be Canadian, and support your team. And I think we'll see more and more of that, because obviously when I was playing, most of the people who liked football were kind of second-generation Europeans or South Americans, whereas now, you know, 20, 40 years have passed, they're full Canadians, so they'll be supporting them. And I think when the World Cup comes to Canada, to Toronto, wherever it's played, it's going to have huge support, and there'll be red shirts everywhere. I'm convinced of it, and I'm jealous because I would have liked that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, last point, and then we'll let you go. We really appreciate your precious time you've given us, and we're grateful for that. But I can't let you go without talking about you and your personal ambitions now in 2020 and looking ahead. Obviously, you've done some managing. You managed, if I'm not mistaken, the first club of Burton Albion. And I know that you have this desire still. If someone comes knocking on your door, possibly down the road of a new CPL franchise across this great country of ours, are you going to answer that call? Are you interested still in managing?
You know what? It was a passion. I really enjoyed my time at Burton Albion. I did 3 years there, which was fabulous. And I've made it no secret that being involved with the national team or be involved in football in Canada would be a huge passion of mine. I'd love to do that. You know, I would love to be involved in any aspect I've offered, but haven't been given any opportunities. So if there was an opportunity and it was interesting, then I would surely look at it because I loved coaching. It was wonderful. It was a great passion, and you know, I'm still doing a little bit of coaching over here. But to have the opportunity to be involved in Canadian program or Canadian national team or whatever it may be, I would have to look at it because, yeah, by all means, that's something that would interest me.
Outstanding. Paul, we can't thank you enough for making time once again. We thank you for all the memories you made for us here back in the great country of Canada, representing Canada, playing for the Blizzard, playing as a youngster in Ontario, and then obviously having success in the UK. Thank you for making time. Happy belated birthday as well, young
Thanks,
man.
Anthony.
You got one more to get to that big number. I'm right there with you. So it's good to be joined by you again to talk about all these great memories. Stay in touch. Stay connected. In Canada, thanks you once again, Paul.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate it. Stay safe.
God bless. Thanks again, Paul.